as well. And my first question has to do with the people who suffer on behalf of the rest of the community in terms of vaccines. So I'll give a very specific example. The flu vaccine in Australia a couple of years ago resulted, a particular flu vaccine was given to young children, resulted in very high temperatures and resulted in, therefore, in some serious damage, including lifetime damage for a particular child. That child suffered greatly on behalf of the rest of us in the community. How should we handle that?
The first very important comment I want to make to that is if you imagine hypothetical worlds with and without effective vaccination, even vaccinations that do have this kind of serious adverse event or side effects still make us better off on balance. We would all better take our chances in a world with lots of effective vaccination as opposed to taking our chances in a world where they do not exist. So arguably, even these persons are better off before the vaccination and the chances that they have in being better off during their lives. That being said, you're completely correct. It is true that vaccinations can have serious side effects, and they are recommended, of course, only in the case where these side effects are outbalanced by their favorable effects. But it doesn't mean the side effects do not exist. It does not mean the harmfulness does not exist. And we must collectively have some mechanism of compensation. We must also have some mechanism of surveillance in order to identify situations where the balance is no longer correct, where we need to pull vaccines out. So we must have very effective pharmacovigilance systems in place in order to only recommend vaccines where the balance is favorable to people to whom they are administered. One other thing which I always find crucially important, and I like the link with the post-truth bit, is that we need to acknowledge that that's the case. We need to be truthful about it. I speak to many colleagues, I'm a physician by background myself, I speak to many colleagues and talk about how they talk to hesitating parents. And the most common mistake I see is that they are presuming selfishness. They are arguing solely on the basis of risk and benefit. They are presuming that altruism and solidarity will never be a factor in parents' decisions. And this leads them to overblow the benefits and to diminish the risks, because in truth, one of the main reasons to vaccinate people in low endemic areas is solidarity, is to keep the herd immunity alive. And this we should be truthful about ourselves. So we need more truthfulness in these cases as well, not just compensation mechanisms and surveillance.
At what point, actually it is the way Samantha finished her talk, talking about the Stop the ABN groups. So these are the groups, and I happen to be familiar with them in Australia, where there's a constant presence on social media taking to task a nurse, for example, who's declared as anti-vax, and actually embarrassing them and working this way. So the question really becomes, to what extent should we be trying to censor groups that speak out against vaccine?
That's actually a very hard question. The best way is, of course, to put a lot of good information out there, to be truthful ourselves, to not assume selfishness, because it happens to be a false assumption. Most people are not only selfish and will be able to hear the solidarity argument. And one of the other important aspects is that most people who do not vaccinate their children are not anti-vaxxers, they are hesitant. Yeah. They have seen everything and its opposite. So rather than censoring, it is probably best to have more media presence and to make the right information available, not only in the places where we would tend to look, but in the places where parents would tend to look. If you look at the magazines that parents will read at the kiosk in your local, wherever you live, it is quite astonishing the space that is taken by vaccine skepticism and the very little space that is actually taken by proper medical information, and we can do a lot better, I think, on that scale.
Well, so I wonder if you can also respond to that question.
Thank you. I think the main thing is to consider that communication is very contextual, and it depends where you are in the world. That in some places it is very normal to censor. You know, we don't like to see that happen, but it is a reality that happens. But in generally, censoring could have a negative effect because people can see past what is being done. Information has a way of making it out there. We need to consider informal channels, and we need to consider that people do have their own ideas, do have the ability to be able to weed out what is true, what is not true. It's the challenge comes when oftentimes arguments sound very good. And what our experience has been in that particular case that it's important to not have those conversations in public fora, so they don't spread widely, because we have seen that type of situation. You can do that by having debates within professional organizations, really talking to people and making sure that they have the ammunition to address individual questions. And it is important that you have those one-on-one conversations, because oftentimes when you try to counter something that somebody never even asked, you end up with a backfire effect. You end up, drawing attention to a particular issue. You risk, creating a problem where one didn't exist previously. So in general, I in particular am not a fan of censorship, but it is really important to ensure that you get good information out there from a number of trusted sources, people that can listen and listen to the questions very carefully to ensure that questions are being answered and that you encourage an opportunity to have a conversation and a debate.
Yeah, Irina.
Thank you. As a public health professional coming from the Technical Assistance Institution of the EU, I would say numbers speak. But as a health promotion at heart, I would say emotions speak.
Yes.
So I would like to talk about that. When you have so usually we say don't talk to the anti-vaxxers. You can't change them. But I would like to bring here the experience of Denmark that had a decrease in HPV vaccination. And they actually started a dialogue with the anti-vaxxers there. In a recent meeting we had in Stockholm on this topic, we realized that both us as public health professionals as well as parents want the best of their kids. And they truly believe that not vaccinating is the best for their children. I think that's a common place to start a meaningful conversation. We both here in this dialogue, face to face, as you say, we have a common starting point. And I think this is what matters, is to establish a common emotional starting point to have a meaningful dialogue.
Did you have a comment to make, either Samantha or Stefan?
Ladies first. I just wanted to follow up on the point of making an argument for solidarity, and I think it does seem to depend on the country and the context. In the UK, for example, the surveys have been that parents wouldn't respond well to that argument. But in Sweden, for example, that was used very successfully in the H1N1 campaign. I think it doesn't mean in the UK that it can't be tried. I think there's this fear of, well, parents say that their first concern is being a parent and making decisions for their children, and possibly the altruism, collective responsibility argument would hold there, but it hasn't been tried. I think, yeah, there's a fear of what kind of response there'll be.
Presume selfishness?
Yeah, because it's presumed that there's
I wonder, therefore, in a place like the United States, where personal responsibility and personal view is put so much more strongly, rather than the solidarity, if that would be the case. I'm happy to come back to you on that. Stefan?
So first of all, sorry for disrupting the all-women panel. I think it's refreshing to see a majority of women. So I think they all deserve a clap, I think. It's refreshing. Secondly, first of all, I was really struck by your comment that there is more space given to skeptic material. And in fact, that's my point, because that's why we need to get out there. We need to express our opinion. We need to write in papers. We need to write blog posts. We need to write social media posts. We need to get out there. We need to do videos. We need to do much more content. and even just for the reason of overwhelming the anti-vaccine content, to have more than them. So we need to be more out there, because we're all talented, we all have so much to do, and this is not just actually for vaccine hesitancy, this is actually across the board, throughout public health. That means that we have to get our voice out there. You know, we have so much to offer. But I think it's also good, and I also appreciate a lot. Maybe my conversation, the way I was talking, was more like emotional, but the presentations that have been here today were more academic oriented, a more scientific approach, and I appreciate that. So whatever we do, whatever communication we bring forward, make sure that it's understandable, but backed by science.
Yeah. I'm just checking for any indication of somebody would like to ask a question. I'm going to take one question. Actually, I need one of those microphones going.
Very interested by all the talks. I have a question exactly related to what you were talking before. One argument that's often brought to my attention is a little technical, but I'm very curious to know how you would answer to this. So, certain times people ask me, or when we talk at school with other moms, they ask me, so which are the differences of vaccine today respect to vaccine in the past? And in particular, which are the improvements that we have done in order to avoid the problems, the side effects that you were talking before, with specific attention to single vaccine versus combined vaccine, and preservative-free vaccine versus mercury-free vaccine versus traditional vaccine. If you can help me, because this is something I get in the discussion a lot. And then connected to this is also all the discussion on personalized medicine. So some parents ask me, and I also wonder myself this question. So let's say a baby of 2 months old. So the baby of 2 months old, according to the national plan, has a series of vaccines to do. But maybe that baby is not going to kindergarten until 2 years old. So why the plan cannot be personalized in the idea that it's going to be at home with their siblings and the siblings are vaccinated? So why it cannot be personalized? Thank you.
Well, I think these are very legitimate and very good questions as well. While my background is not in the real work of the intimate work of vaccination, what I would say, so I can give you some feedback or input related to the type of conversation we can have with parents and the type of training we could do for healthcare professionals to have that conversation, and others beyond that. I would say there is a difference, of course. So to be very short, there is an evolving difference in the way they are structured. And of course that in the modern world, we don't have the same adjuvants that we used to have before. So therefore the side effects associated with those are much less important. What I would like though to focus on is the idea of having a personalized discussion. And I'm not touching the idea of personalized schedule here. Maybe some of my colleagues will go into that. But I think it's important to see where the person is in the dialogue. So you mentioned a very concrete question. I would like to open it up and say a little bit that you have to see where the person in front of you is with the knowledge level or with the skills and with the emotions, and start the dialogue from there, because it's not one size fits all. So taking this example and enlarging, we do have a training program for frontline healthcare professionals, and we will, together with UN Nations, we will try to support the frontline healthcare professionals to identify where the person is in this continuum of vaccine acceptance versus vaccine hesitancy. Do they need information, factual information, like your question, or do they need more emotional, motivational discussion, so on and so forth? So there is a scale, a range of positions where your client, I wouldn't call it a patient, this is a healthy person you are talking to, and too often we call them patients, and I don't think this is nice. So you have to see where your client point is. I hope I answered at least part of your question, and I leave the others for the personalized schedule. Because we see a lot of variety in the European Union, and I think we respect, as a technical institution, we respect every single member state opinion on that. So.
Thanks. Lois, if you could please.
I thought that was a very interesting question that you asked, and the first thing that came to mind was, what was the impetus for the question? You know, is the person looking for confidence that vaccines are evolving? Like, for instance, are they looking for assurance that we're looking at the disease burden? For, like, for instance, the shift from oral polio vaccines to inactivated vaccines might be one example where you get a sense of that's a good thing, that the governments are monitoring and they're seeing what is the need in that particular context. Or going from the wholesale pertussis vaccines, which are really needed in many parts of the world, to a cellular pertussis, and constantly looking to see whether the trade-offs between efficacy and safety are being addressed appropriately for that particular situation. The personalized medicine question, I think, was also an interesting one, and again, it's important to have the conversation of where are they coming from? Is it an issue of, you know, the parent, you know, just doesn't want to have that many visits and it's inconvenient, or is it truly a concern about, you know, the number of antigens within a particular vaccine, or is it coming from somewhere else where maybe they just read something and that seems to be the trend that they're concerned about? But I think getting to the crux of, you know, where the question is coming from is important, and that's how the answer should be constructed depending on the nature of the question.
Thanks very much. While the microphone is going to the person back over there, can you just indicate your hand? Thank you. Let me also say something, Eleonora, that 35 years ago, because my son's 35 years, I remember asking, and before I was involved in health, I remember as a parent asking exactly the same questions because I really wanted to know. There was somebody who was going to put a foreign substance into my baby's arm with a bloody syringe. And so I wanted to know. And I think that's a fundamental engaging on that level was important. And actually I had the skills because I was at university, and I had the skills to go look up Medline Express and to go through a proper process to answer those questions myself, but not so many people do, which is where we need our training from our health professionals. I think that was a very interesting discussion and fitted in with what we are trying to achieve. Here, can I go to you then to Lois here?
Yes, thank you. My name is Eric Kaufman with Autistic Minority International. I'm wondering if we are not starting this discussion from a wrong assumption that all information is created equal. I mean, it has been going on 2 decades, I think, since Andrew Wakefield first falsified research claiming that certain vaccines cause autism. It has been refuted multiple times by the World Health Organization, etc. Just recently, again, in a very large-scale study that also found there's absolutely no link between vaccines and autism. Still, there are people who are claiming there is. And some of them are very influential, and I think one name we haven't mentioned today is that of Donald Trump, who on multiple occasions tweeted that he personally knew infants that were perfectly healthy, developing normally, they got vaccinated and turned autistic, which, you know, has a lot more impact than anything any of us could say. There are other people like that, other influencers on social media, like Jenny McCarthy, like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., like Robert De Niro, for example, with his movie Vaxxed, that are promoting this view. Now there's an entire army of actually autistic people on social media that is trying to counteract that. Because the people who certainly don't believe that autism is caused by vaccines is us, autistic people. And we are, many of us, joining parents groups, talking to people on a one-to-one basis or in the group about this issue, about autism, what is it, why is it not as bad as people think. We believe it is a neurological difference that is equally valid like other neurotypes. It is both genetic and hereditary, and it often, in families where almost every family member is autistic regardless of any vaccinations. And we don't think this is anything to fear. But the emotional argument is much stronger still. And quite often autistic people in these groups get chucked out, they get banned from the group because they argue against it.
Yeah.
And
thank you very much. I think the points you made are very, very clear and I think very challenging. And you would like to just say one more thing quickly.
One thing
okay.
I really want to make is that the pathologization of autism is ultimately really enforced by the World Health Organization and by the health community. So to challenge this vaccine hesitancy around autism, work with autistic people, listen to what we have to say to you at the national level, work with autistic-led self-advocacy organizations in countering these arguments and embrace autism acceptance. Don't listen to what the mental health department at the World Health Organization is telling you, because they have been influenced by organizations that are under the influence of these anti-vaxxers.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I think one of the things I was not explicit enough about before, but that does need to be made explicit, you're correct, is that proper medical information is not just information that's backed by science, but pointing to where it's not. And I think we have to be braver than we've been with that, with pointing at information that is wrong, that is just false. And it is not easy for people to make up their own minds about that. We are very optimistic about the levels of schoolings all over the world, and perhaps to start with the United States, where we assume that people will be able to make a difference between something that is backed and something that is unbacked, and we need to help them do that. On your other point, I have a son who has autism, and the number of times I've had this discussion with him is countless. Here are people in the world who believe that the way you are is so wrong that they would rather see their child dead than like you. I have to explain to him why these people are wrong. And this is not a conversation we should be having in private only. We should be having it out there too, yes.
Did anybody else want to make a comment before I go to the next question? Yes, so we'll take some comments from the panel.
So when it comes to, I'm not sure where you come from. I come from Switzerland. Okay. So when it comes to someone as influential as Donald Trump, I actually hinted to him in my presentation very subtly. I didn't want to give too much attention to him. But I have my hope in a new crop of politicians, especially in the US, who one of them shares my surname even. And you might have heard about him.
We can even pronounce it now.
Well,
Buttigieg.
Don't worry, he's not my cousin. But maybe I wish he was my cousin. But anyway, that's another story. But pointing to those kind of politicians who actually have gone through all of this, have underwent the trauma actually of even witnessing this whole movement, and they know. And also remember as well that politics is temporary. So someone, for example, like a US president, he has his term and he has to change. Now, unless there isn't a big change in politics, then you become an authoritarian government, or you become like a dictatorship. there we have a problem, yes. But when it comes to the politicians that we have right now, at least I have hope. And I have hope that they will seek intergenerational justice. That's my true hope in all of this.
Thank you.
I don't know if that answers your question, so.
Yeah. The other thing I really want to encourage people to do is to shift the conversation. When we're talking about the negatives, and that's what people remember. You know, when I spoke about the backfire effect, every single time we talk about that, people remember the negative things. It's just, it's human nature. But how many times have we said, go and get your measles vaccines, measles is a problem, but we forget to say what measles even does. I don't know how many people are out there that are thinking, well, it's just a rite of passage, every child gets it, and we forget to talk about how serious some of these diseases or what the impact is. It's not just that your child is going to die, but if your child gets hospitalized and your family is on the verge of being able to make the next meal or not make the next meal, that makes a huge difference. Medical impoverishment is a huge, huge issue. We never even talk about it. We're only talking about the diseases. We're not talking about equity issues. We're not talking about the benefits that vaccines have beyond just preventing a particular disease. So we need to be very bold and start to talk about these other benefits of immunization that go beyond preventing the individual disease. The benefit of bringing people in to see a health provider and have conversations about your child's growth or how well somebody is thriving and what else you can do. These are all huge, so let's take the opportunity to shift conversations and make sure that people understand the broader value of immunization. I'm going to make a really, really shameless plug right now, though. There's a tool out there that's called VOICE, Value of Immunization Compendium of Evidence, widely available at immunizationevidence.org. Talks about some of the things, the benefits of immunization that go beyond what we normally think about. And I would encourage everybody to educate yourself. And there's a lot of really good resources out there that's go to your individual governments, your health programs, things like that. But make sure that you know about the benefits of vaccine and talk about those broadly. Thank you.
So VOICE, the URL is voice.com. We Google immunisation and VOICE.
The link is called immunizationevidence.org, and it's either with a Z, the American way, or an S.
Or a Z if you're not American.
I would like to quickly build on what you said, Lois, and I think we should challenge ourselves, instead of talking about vaccine hesitancy, a highly negative term. Why can't we reframe our thinking and talk more about vaccine confidence, as the London School talks, or even vaccine acceptance, the little less brave term. Let's keep the sunny side out, and let's persuade media to use those news as sensational news, because positive can be sensational as well. And I do agree with you, we have to catch up with social media presence.
And credit, of course, to the set of slides that was up before, and I'm going to go have a stab at the figure. I took a photo of it. Was it yours, Samantha, that said we've saved 250 million lives from measles? There was a slide that was put up earlier today. It was something like that, but I noted the positive. I think I actually took a photo of it because it actually struck me, oh, that's a much better way to be thinking about this. Lois, you had indicated a question. Can I just check if somebody else is indicating a question as well? So you're first, yeah.
Thank you. First, I'd like to congratulate and thank you, Stefan and Samantha, and all the panel members for the insightful comments. And the second, I remember earlier in the morning, Bettina made an important question about trust. And I would like to hear from you if between all the causes that the people have bad attitudes or suspicious attitudes about vaccinations, what about if they have distrust our leaders, our policymakers, our public health workers, and our businessmen from our shareholders from the industry, the vaccine industry or the pharma industry? Does it play a role?
In trust. I'm going to just hold that because we've framed a lot of things today in terms of trust, so we will come to that. But I'd like to take the other question as well, and I think we're just starting to get a little tight on time. So if you can make a comment, any question, or Ross first here.
Thank you. I think I was going to make the same point, that we shouldn't treat vaccine hesitancy as isolation. I think survey shows that people who don't believe in vaccine also are prone to believe in other conspiracy theory, from 9/11 to fake moon landing and so on. And I think that shows what you said. It's global erosion in trust in institution, politician, medical establishment. And that's what we should address when you talk about shifting conversation. It's not why do you believe vaccines are bad, but what's behind that. And there was a very interesting report and documentary on people who believe the earth is flat, and believe me, it's big, especially in the UK. And it's surreal, totally surreal. And that's the same people who won't vaccinate their children. So that's what needs to be questioned. Why have we reached that point? The vaccine hesitancy, in my view, is a consequence of something much bigger.
I think those...
Completely correct. It is often linked to a lack of trust, and as a matter of fact, there was quite a splash a few years ago when a British pediatrician wrote that he just didn't want to see parents who did not want to vaccinate their children anymore, because if they lacked trust in his own judgment so badly that they thought that he would actively harm their child in order to get personal gain, why would they believe anything else that he would advise them to do? So they had no place in his office. Of course, that's an extreme stance, but it does point to something that is important. I think one of the most illustrative, one of the most clarifying accounts of trust nowadays is one that has become quite famous by the Irish philosopher Nora O'Neill, who says that we trust if we believe a person or a group will do something specific in a manner that is competent, reliable, and honest. And we have not always been completely, how shall I put it, completely perfect at being visibly competent, reliable, and honest in prescription. We know that we have not always done so well in dealing with conflicts of interest and making it visible how we deal with conflicts of interest, and there are some grounds to some degree of distrust that is not only, quote-unquote, the fault of the person who distrusts us. That is true. But vaccine hesitancy comes in many shapes and forms. There is a taxonomy or a differential diagnosis, if you like, that is sometimes overlooked. And there are also some parents who will not vaccinate their child because of other deeper social phenomena that have nothing to do with trust in medicine. These people make sometimes quite a dispassionate assessment of the risk and the benefit of the vaccine. It's not that they don't believe the doctor, but they do believe that they can help their child not catch the disease much better by keeping them within their gated communities. Here the representation is it's poor people in other neighborhoods that are sick, and if I just keep my child apart, I will not need to vaccinate the child. This is the sign of another social ill, of course, not the same one as the first, but you're correct in that case as well. It goes deeper, and I want to second the recommendation to watch this documentary on the flat earth community. I think it's done very intelligently and has a lot to teach us in how to respond to ludicrously ridiculous ideas that nevertheless apparently intelligent people hold.
Yes. Thank you.
It's on Netflix.
Yeah. Please, Samantha. So responding to both of those, thank you very much. Can I just hear it for Professor Hurst?
Yeah, on those points, I think if we're going to be on the side of what is a positive approach rather than labelling the discussion in a negative way, bringing in those groups who are very supportive of vaccination is one way of doing that, and that's why I really like your comment about autism groups and what they might offer to the pro-vaccine side or to promoting the cause of vaccination.
I would like to share with you two pieces of science. for a change. We did a literature review together with the London School, the Vaccine Confidence Project, around determinants of vaccine hesitancy in Europe. And that literature review showed that the main concern is vaccine safety. And then we also did focus groups with healthcare professionals in 4 countries: Greece, Croatia, Romania, and France. And the purpose of these focus groups was to identify these healthcare workers' perceptions and the perceptions they have about their patients around vaccine hesitancy. It turned out that from these 2 types of researches, that basically people trust their family doctors, but they don't trust the pharma industry. And we also, I cannot give you the links to these documents, you just need to Google. I can leave outside some flyers with where our publications are. But you will also see a correlation. For example, Greece at that time had some economic challenges, so you can see that this correlates with lower trust in public authorities. So indeed, the issue is broader, and you have to place it within the right context. But don't forget, speak to the hearts also, besides speaking to the brain.
Yes.
Great. I just want to say a little bit about terminology, because oftentimes we use trust and confidence and hesitancy and demand, all of these terms interchangeably, and oftentimes we're talking about different things. And I think one of the things that is important to recognize is that a little bit of hesitancy is not necessarily a bad thing. You know, we want to encourage people asking questions. We want to continue to probe and see whether vaccines are doing what they're supposed to, and if they're not, that we have a plan to be able to do that. So the important thing is to ensure that we are finding a way that we are being true to ourselves, that we're looking at the value of vaccines, that we're providing vaccines that are safe and effective on balance, that we're also understanding that people are individuals and that we need to listen to every single person and ask the probing questions. Oftentimes this is difficult because, you know, I know in many parts of the world the health providers don't have enough time to be able to have these conversations. But when these questions do come up, it's really crucial to have the probing questions and find out what is behind that, because that person that may be hesitant or may have a certain lack of trust may all of a sudden become a champion in your community. They may be the ones that just convince all the other people around because they've been through that process themselves. The other thing I would also encourage people to do is make sure you talk to your politicians. You're here because you're all interested in public health. You have a background in public health and are trusted by them. So use your voice and go out and educate and make sure that there's no more people like Donald Trump out there talking, you know, perpetuating some of these ridiculous ideas. It's a platform that you could use your voice to be able to put positive information out there and put it out there in a balanced manner.
Now imagine winning Donald Trump's heart. But joking aside, I have 2 main points I want to focus on. Vaccine safety. Continued investment in research on vaccines is critical. Without that, we won't have safe vaccines.
Independent.
Very important. Vaccinology, vaccine safety, high priority. The second thing I want to point out, and this comes into the government aspect in government, even information architecture. And here I'm going to challenge you all, for example. So how easy it is, for example, to find vaccine immunization schedules online. It's a mess.
We have it.
Of each country in Europe.
In
Great,
the
you see?
In the EU.
In the EU. Okay, so that's great. But many times it's really difficult to find. So, for example, we are an international couple. My wife is Polish and I'm Maltese. Even to find, for example, the immunization schedule of different countries, sometimes they're not even aligned. So there is a challenge. And when it comes to any information which is online, especially health information, I think we need to invest time and effort into the user experience of finding the information. That means that you don't have to click 25 times to get to that piece of information. You click 2 times, max. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
My name is Cole McDougall-Hunter. I have a tracking company, but basically I'm here because I'm interested in designing an autonomous vaccine carrier box, solar powered, etc. But my question is to Stefan, why can't you guys invent an app which basically resumes the status of your vaccination personally, instead of us having to carry around these silly little yellow booklets that you lose, that get stamped the upside down, that you go to Cameroon and they say it's not valid, and then you come back and say, what's that? Why can't you put everything, you guys today, you put everything on apps. Why can't we have a WHO app that everybody can fill in? Thank you very much.
Just before we answer that question, I'll put my question as well. So, as the CEO of the Public Health Association of Australia, we combined with a number of other organisations and decided, this is about 8 years ago, and decided that every time we saw a media report that tried to balance, and Samantha, you talked about this, that tried to balance anti-vax and vax perspective, we wouldn't go to the anti-vax person, we would go to the journalist who'd written it. And we used quite a strident approach, in the sense we had this nicely organised, and we would phone them and we'd say, do you know what, when you present something like that, it's actually a distortion, because we know that 98% of the evidence is with pro-vaccine and 2% of the evidence is with the anti-vax. So actually, if you really want a balanced article, that's how you should present it. And the impact was really quite dramatic. Was it a good idea? Did it work? I said the impact was dramatic, obviously it did have work. Please, Stefan, you start and respond to that. Yeah.
So, first of all, thank you for your question. It actually shows something very important, because there are incredible immunization information systems which also feed information to mobile devices and back and forth. And you know what? You actually don't know about it. That's a problem. You don't know enough. There's also, even what we do, like even the investments we do in our information systems sometimes are not marketed enough.
Yeah.
You know, so there is that challenge over there. That means that all the work that we do, imagine we've done like 1 million worth of work, and then little budget for marketing, maybe 5K. With 5K, what can you do for a 1 million project and to reach an audience? So you need to balance out even the marketing aspect. But yes, I agree as well that there should be an open source solution information for immunization information system, and I believe there is. But it should be more publicly available and more marketed to the wider audience. That's all.
Thanks.
I take up the challenge. So ECDC does have a vaccination scheduler on our website. You can find all vaccine schedules of various countries, but you have to find it. I take up the challenge on marketing. Thank you. There is a discussion, at least at the EU level, to have a digitalized form or shape for different vaccination status of the population in the EU. So this requires, it's not a simple process, because every member state decides their own vaccination schedule. So it will require a little bit of intense negotiation. But we might get there, so we might reach at the point where I'm not sure if it will be an app, it's too early to say, but there will be a way to track in a digital form the vaccination status in the EU.
Now, anything else in your final statement, and then we'll just go to the other two.
Okay, I have 3 messages.
Okay, 3 messages, good. This is the elevator pitch.
The first message is to use evidence for policy and practice. I think that's the ethical way, and we too often design policies without, at least policies, without looking at the practice. My second message, I already mentioned it, address minds and hearts, because I think one without the other will not work. And my third message is that the time to act is now. I think we have enough evidence in place, although it's global and we need more local, community-based evidence. But come on, let's put up our sleeves and let's start working.
Excellent. Can you pass to Samantha, please?
Yeah, that's a great example about looking at false balance and seeing, well, this is something we can actually make a difference in our area and our specific remit. So I really like that example. And in the UK, the BBC actually, they have a policy of not providing false balance where there's scientific consensus on an issue. So same for climate change.
Climate change, yeah.
And that's a specific policy of the BBC. So I think we need to look at things within our world, in our remit, where we can make those what seem like maybe small changes, and then you'll see bigger changes happening. So,
and that's your final message?
That's my final message.
Excellent. Please to Lois.
Thank you for the opportunity. My main message is use your voice. Every single person here in this room is a change agent, and we all have family, we all have friends. It's great when you get to talk to journalists, so I would really encourage you to do that and talk to them about that the wrong information is not balanced. So I'm glad that point was brought up, because we've had a lot of experience working with journalists to get them to recognize what they're really doing and what fair balance truly is. The other plug I would love to make is something that was brought up at the end, is about the platforms for digitizing and the need to really standardize records, because information is what is going to move us forward. And the ability to hold ourselves accountable and see whether we're truly making progress. But to do that, platforms need to speak to each other. So I'm not always a fan of mandates and legislation, but in this particular case, I think it would be really useful to have some degree of standardization. And then my final point is to remember that we're dealing with people, and people are individuals. They all have different needs. They all have come to an office or come to a particular situation with a background and with a particular reason, and take the time to really talk to them and find out what's behind their questions.
Stefan.
Okay, so I don't want to repeat, but create remarkable user experience, use your voice, and when you use your voice, make sure that you go to the right distribution list and market it as much as possible.
Thank you very much. With regard to the little yellow book that nobody responded to, I actually updated mine. When I took my passport out and looked, oh, there's my little yellow book, and I hadn't updated it myself, and I haven't got anybody to stamp it. Now I'm going to have to go and get the evidence. I think the idea of an app where I can just access by immunisation record, and if I'm asked when I'm in Mongolia or wherever, I can go, here it is. I think it's a great idea, and it just can't be that hard. Can I hear a thank you for our panel and for our speakers, please?